Do you know what it means to be loved by death?
Your eyes, what a cruel kind of beautiful, the kind that autumn envies. They remind me of golden leaves caught in the wind, of old books with stories aching to be told. I see in them a fire that never dims, and every time you look my way, I swear, I fall all over again.
The air in the room didn't just feel cold, it felt heavy, like the atmosphere right before a deadly storm. The only sounds were the rhythmic crack of the whip and the wet, desperate gasps of the two people on the floor. Kimtaehyung sat on the velvet sofa, his posture relaxed like a king on a throne of bones. They called him the Hollow King because he had no soul left to bargain with. To the world, he was the silent plague. By the time you realized he was there, you were already dead. He was the vicar of death, the man who ruled the underworld with a grip so tight that even the government bowed to his shadow. There's only one way to explain his existence. You will never know who he's in reality because the depth of his existence exceeds the limit of your understanding. His dark aura was suffocating, a thick cloud of power and malice that made the oxygen feel thin. His physique was a masterpiece of lethal grace. Broad shoulders stretched the expensive fabric of his black dress shirt, and his chest was solid, like carved marble. The two top buttons were undone, revealing the edges of dark, intricate tattoos that crawled up his collarbone, secrets hidden under silk. His eyes were not human, they were two voids of abysmal black that enjoyed the sight of his enemies breaking. Then, the door clicked. Y/N stepped out, her wired earphones falling around her neck. The moment the sight hit her eyes, her world shattered. Taehyung's gaze shifted. It didn't snap toward her, it traveled slowly, like a predator that had found a much more interesting prize. He tilted his head, his cold eyes taking in her trembling form, her pale face, and the way her small hands bunched up the fabric of her anarkali dress. She was suffocating. Every breath she tried to take felt like swallowing glass. She couldn't look at the monster on the sofa, but she could see her aunt and uncle on the floor, covered in blood, looking at her with nothing but hatred. Panic took over. She needed her medicine. Her legs felt like lead as she stumbled toward the kitchen, her mind a blur of terror. As she ran, her dupatta slipped from her shoulders, fluttering to the floor like a fallen wing. She didn't stop. She didn't care. She just needed to breathe. Behind her, the room went dead silent. Taehyung stood up. The movement was lethal and smooth. His guards instantly dropped to their knees, their heads bowed in absolute submission. Taehyung walked toward the kitchen, his polished shoes clicking on the floor. He stopped where her dupatta lay. He picked it up slowly. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the soft fabric. He didn't just look at it, he brought it to his face and took a long, deep breath, inhaling the scent of vanilla and fear that clung to the threads. He closed his eyes, his head tilting back in a moment of dark ecstasy, while his other hand casually swirled a glass of blood-red wine. Y/N was on her knees behind the counter, hidden from the world. She was frantically tearing through drawers. Empty. 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 They had thrown them away. "YN, no, please," she whispered, her voice a broken thread. Her hand hit a glass jar, and it shattered. The sound was like a G*NSH0T in the quiet kitchen. She didn't move. She couldn't. She collapsed further, her back against the cold cabinets, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard it hurt. Then, she remembered. The emergency. With shaking fingers, she pulled open a bottom drawer and felt around until she touched it, a half-eaten piece of chocolate wrapped in a scrap of newspaper. She didn't open her eyes. She couldn't risk seeing what was out there. She tore the paper and began to eat the chocolate, her chest heaving as she tried to force her nervous system to calm down. Suddenly, the air changed. It became hot and thick with a scent that smelled like expensive wood, expensive wine, and danger. Taehyung was right there. He knelt down, one knee on the floor, his body looming over her like a shadow. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating off him. He leaned in, his face inches from hers, and inhaled her fragrance again. Y/N's face went ghost white. She felt his hot breath on her skin. It was terrifying. She tried to slide her body away, her skin crawling, but there was nowhere to go. She forced herself to stand, her legs shaking so violently she nearly fell again. She kept her eyes glued to the floor, refusing to look at the man who held the city in his palm. Taehyung stood up with her. He was a giant compared to her. He didn't say a word. He took her fallen dupatta and wrapped it firmly around her waist, using it as a barrier. His large hand gripped her waist over the cloth. He didn't touch her bare skin, but the hold was possessive, unyielding. Before she could gasp, he lifted her. Y/N was suddenly in the air. Even lifted, she only reached his chest. She stared at the open buttons of his shirt, at the ink on his skin, too terrified to look higher. Taehyung didn't care. He stared at her face, his eyes devouring every detail of her distress. He noticed the glass shards on the floor near her bare feet. With a slow, deliberate movement of his boot, he swept every single piece of glass, even the tiny, shimmering dust, into the corner. He made sure the path was clear, protecting her feet from the very violence he had created. He carried her past the counter and set her down gently once they were safe. The moment her feet touched the floor, Y/N bolted. She ran toward the darkest hallway of the house, toward her room, never once looking back. Taehyung stood in the center of the kitchen, watching the spot where she disappeared. He brought the dupatta to his nose one last time, a dark, twisting smirk pulling at his lips. He looked up at the ceiling, his eyes hooded, making sure he was the only one breathing in the scent she left behind. "Taehyung, Xavier," he said, his voice a low, vibrating growl. "Xavier, yes, Commander." Xavier replied, stepping forward but keeping his eyes down. "Taehyung, tell me, what do I lack?" Taehyung said, his smirk widening into something unsettling. Matthew, another guard nearby, spoke up before thinking. "Matthew, I know the answer. It's humanity." The silence that followed was heavy. Bang. A G*N shot rang out. Xavier didn't move, even as the B** let tore through his own shoulder. He had stepped in front of Matthew at the last second. BL00D began to soak his suit, but his expression stayed robotic. "Xavier, your lady, Commander," Xavier said firmly, his voice never wavering. Taehyung's smirk grew. He walked over and patted Xavier's pounding shoulder, the exact spot where he had just shot him. He leaned past Xavier to look at a trembling, pale Matthew. "Taehyung, Xavier, note my advice," Taehyung whispered, his voice like a razor. "Taehyung, if next time you come between me and my hunt, I will hunt you down. From heaven to hell. Across the whole universe. And I still won't forgive you. Did you get it?" Xavier nodded, "I understand." Taehyung patted the shoulder again. "Taehyung, give yourself a treat. Your answer was right." He turned his gaze back to the hallway where Y/N had fled. That was when her aunt, sensing a chance to live, crawled forward. "Y/N aunt, take her. Take her if you want. We won't say anything. We were going to sell her anyway. Just leave us. You can rip her limbs apart, we don't care." The woman shrieked, her voice desperate. Taehyung's grip on Xavier's shoulder tightened until the bone nearly groaned. His eyes turned a shade of black that promised a slow death. Xavier spoke for him. "Xavier, I will make sure their limbs are ripped apart after this, Commander." Taehyung didn't even look at the woman. He pulled out his gun and fired 3 times. Not at her, but at the legs of 3 of his own men who had been caught looking toward the hallway where Y/N had run. They fell to the floor, screaming. "Taehyung, you dare to eye your lady Commander?" Taehyung asked, his voice deathly quiet. He emptied the rest of the clip into them. He looked at Xavier, who simply nodded. "Xavier, just as you want, Commander. I will make their limb rip apart too and make sure they don't even find peace in death." Taehyung turned away, walking slowly toward the dark room where Y/N was hiding. Xavier stayed behind, stopping anyone from following. He knew the rule now. To look at her was to die. To touch her was to be erased from existence. The king had found his queen, and he was going to burn the world just to keep her in the dark with him. Matthew was still in shock when Xavier tied his bloodied arm with a hanky and said while looking at Matthew. "Xavier, from tomorrow, you will work under me. You won't be allowed to join any outing for next 1 month." He says and took a step towards him, making him flinch as he saw the anger in his eyes. That's why he kept looking down while Xavier stared deep into his soul. "Xavier, and keep that mouth of yours shut in front of him, if you like your life even a bit," he says while Matthew gulped and nodded. Other men's already start handling the dead and alive bodies. The heavy oak door didn't just open, it exploded inward with a single, violent kick from Taehyung's combat boot. The wood splintered, the bang echoing like a cannon shot in the small, dim room. YN was standing by the balcony railing, her body half leaning over the edge. She was looking for an escape, a jump, a drop, anything to get away from the smell of iron and the sound of the whip. But the sudden blast of the door made her heart lurch. Her foot slipped on the smooth stone. She gasped, her balance vanishing as she began to tilt backward into the empty air. Before gravity could take her, a blur of black moved. Taehyung was there in a heartbeat. He didn't grab her skin. With a flick of his wrist, he snagged the end of her long dupatta, looping it around her waist like a silken rope and jerking her forward. The force slammed her small frame directly into his rock-hard chest. He caught her, his hand clamping over the fabric at her waist to hold her steady. The proximity was suffocating. He was a wall of heat and muscle, standing so close that she was forced to breathe the air he exhaled. His dark gaze was fixed on her face, tracing the path of a single tear, but Wyan couldn't look up. Her eyes were locked onto the cold, matte black metal of the handgun gripped in his other hand. Wyan, please. Don't kill me with that. Please. I hate pain. She whispered, her voice trembling so hard it was barely audible. A mischievous, dark smirk tugged at the corner of Taehyung's lips. He liked the way she trembled. He liked that she was terrified of the cold metal but didn't realize he was the far more dangerous weapon in the room. He intentionally brought the gun up, the barrel tracing a slow, agonizing line through the air until it hovered just inches from her face. He leaned down, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear, though he kept his hands strictly on the dupatta. He inhaled the scent of her hair, sweet, like honey and panic. Taehyung, pain? He murmured, his voice a deep, vibrating hum that made her skin crawl. Taehyung, oh, but this doesn't give pain, little malice. It gives death. It's a very quick, very permanent sleep. He moved the gun down, intentionally pressing the cold shooting point against her waist, right over the fabric of her dress. Wyan flinched violently. Without thinking, her hands flew up to stabilize herself, her fingers bunching and clutching the expensive silk of his black shirt. She held on for dear life, her knuckles brushing the heat of his chest. Taehyung's eyes darkened with a flash of primal satisfaction. He had forced her to touch him. Wyan, no. I saw in movies. You just get admitted into the hospital no matter how many bullets you took, and then you will be alive again. But it will be so painful until I will be okay again. She stammered, her eyes wide and fixed on the weapon. The silence that followed was broken by a low, dark chuckle that vibrated through Taehyung's chest and into her own. It was a sound of genuine amusement, the sound a predator makes when its prey does something cute. Taehyung, is that so? He asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He tilted his head, his nose skimming the air just above her shoulder. Taehyung, then how about we check it? A little science experiment for my little malice. I'll shoot you right here. He pressed the barrel a little firmer against her side. Taehyung, and if you don't die, it means your movies are right. And if you die, well, then you die. At least you won't have to worry about the hospital bill. Wyan, pleasey. She sobbed, her grip on his shirt tightening as she shook her head frantically, her eyes brimming with tears. Taehyung pulled back just enough to look down at her, though he didn't loosen his hold on her waist. The intensity in the room was soaring. The air felt thick, like it was charged with electricity. He was enjoying this far too much, the way she looked like a broken doll in his shadow, the way her breath was coming in short, jagged gasps. Taehyung, why should I stop? He asked, his voice dropping to a silky, dangerous whisper. Taehyung, what will I get if I leave you alive and don't shoot? Wyan's mind raced. She was desperate, cornered by a man who treated murder like a hobby. She blurted out. Wyan, I can give you money. Just 2 years. I swear. After 2 years, no matter how much money you ask for, I can give it to you. I'm going to receive immense wealth after these 2 years, then I can pay you back for my life. Taehyung went still. He looked at her like she was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. Taehyung, money? He repeated, his tone mocking. Taehyung, you think the king of the underworld is short on cash, little malice? You think I'm a debt collector? He leaned in even closer, his face so near hers that if she moved an inch, their lips would touch. He closed his eyes and took a deep, shaky breath, smelling the salt of her tears and the sweetness of the chocolate she had eaten. He didn't touch her skin, but the heat radiating from him was so intense it felt like he was branding her. Taehyung, 2 years, that's a long time to wait for a paycheck. He mused, his voice sounding like velvet over gravel. Wyan, I'll give you everything. Just please, don't shoot. She cried, her eyes squeezed shut. Taehyung pulled the gun away from her waist, but he didn't put it away. Instead, he used the barrel to gently lift her chin, forcing her to tilt her head up, though she still kept her eyes stubbornly closed. Taehyung, fine. He said, the smirk returning to his face, wider and more predatory than before. Taehyung, I like a good investment. But I don't give loans for free. If I have to wait 2 years for my money, I need something to hold on to. Something to make sure you don't run away and hide in another movie plot. He leaned down, his breath ghosting over her trembling lips. Taehyung, you're coming with me. Consider yourself collateral. For the next 2 years, you belong to me. You eat when I say, you sleep where I say, and you breathe because I allow it. And in 2 years, when you get your immense wealth. He paused, his voice turning dark and possessive. Taehyung, we'll see if I even want the money anymore. Hwayeon's breath hitched. She was trading a cage for a dragon's den. Taehyung, open your eyes, little malice. He commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Taehyung, look at your owner. Slowly, trembling, Hwayeon opened her eyes. She finally looked up, meeting the gaze of death itself. Taehyung was staring at her with an expression that wasn't just cold, it was hungry. He didn't wait for her to agree. He simply turned, keeping her wrapped in the dupatta and pulling her along with him like a prize he had just won from the devil. The interior of the black SUV was a vacuum of terror. Hwayeon had scrambled into the furthest corner of the leather seat, trying to shrink her body until she disappeared into the door panel. She was trembling so violently that her teeth clicked together, her breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches that made her feel faint. Taehyung sat only inches away, but in the confined space, he felt like he was everywhere. He didn't sit like a normal passenger. He lounged, one arm draped over the back of the seat behind her head, effectively pinning her in his territory without ever making skinship. He held a fresh glass of dark wine in one hand, while the other played idly with her fallen dupatta. He kept bringing the fabric to his face, his eyes hooded and dark as he watched her. To him, she wasn't a girl, she was a wounded bird he had decided to keep. He watched the way her pulse jumped in her neck, his gaze tracing the lines of her face like a hunter admiring his meal before the first bite. The silence was only broken by the low hum of the engine and the soft sound of Hwayeon's stifled sobs. Taehyung, Xavier. Taehyung spoke, his voice cutting through the quiet like a cold blade. Xavier, yes, Commander? Xavier replied from the driver's seat, his voice professional despite the heavy bandage soaking with blood under his suit jacket. Taehyung took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving Hwayeon's pale, tear-streaked face. Taehyung, clear my schedule for tomorrow. Call the best designer in the city. Tell them I need a bridal dress, white, pure, and expensive enough to make a queen weep. And tell the staff to decorate the grand hall. White lilies. I want the scent of death and life mixed together. Hwayeon's breath hitched. Her heart stopped for a full second before thundering against her ribs. She looked up, her eyes wide and glassy with shock, finally meeting his dark, swirling gaze. Hwayeon, why? Who is getting married? She whispered, her voice cracking. Taehyung tilted his head, a slow, terrifyingly beautiful smirk spreading across his face. He leaned in, the heat of his body washing over her like a fever. He brought his hand up, and for a moment, she thought he would hit her, but he simply used his forefinger to catch a stray tear on her cheek, though he did it through the fabric of her dupatta, still refusing to touch her skin directly. Taehyung, we are, little malice. It's our wedding tomorrow. He murmured, his voice a deep, gravelly purr. Hwayeon felt the world tilt. Her head spun, and she felt a wave of nausea. Hwayeon, no. You said I was collateral. You said 2 years, for the money. Taehyung, I changed my mind. Taehyung interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent chills down her spine. Taehyung, why wait 2 years for paper when I can have the source of the wealth right now? You're weak, you're scared, and you have no one. Who better to protect you than the devil himself? He leaned closer, his nose brushing against her temple as he inhaled her scent again, a low groan of satisfaction escaping his throat. Taehyung, don't look so pitiful. You should be happy. Most people pray to God or the devil for mercy. You? You get to marry the one who rules them both. Hwayeon shook her head, her hands clutching her chest as she struggled to find air. Hwayeon, I can't. I don't want to, please. Taehyung. You don't have a choice. Taehyung said, his tone suddenly turning ice cold, the playfulness vanishing. He leaned forward until his face was mere millimeters from hers, his shadow completely swallowing her small, trembling frame. He didn't touch her, but the sheer force of his presence felt like a physical grip on her soul. Taehyung, you wanted to live, didn't you? This is the price. Tomorrow, you stop being a nameless girl and you become the queen of the underworld. My wife. My property. He stayed there for a heartbeat longer, his dark eyes scanning every inch of her terrified expression, before he slowly sat back, swirling his wine with a bored expression as if he hadn't just shattered her entire world. Taehyung, Xavier, drive faster. He commanded, his voice indifferent. Taehyung, the little malice looks like she's about to faint, and I'd prefer she stays awake to see her new home. Hwayeon collapsed against the door, her eyes staring blankly at the passing city lights. She was trapped. She had promised him money to save her life, but she had unintentionally handed him her soul. The grand cathedral doors groaned as they swung open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. Yn stood at the altar, a vision of tragic purity in a heavy, lace-embroidered white gown that felt like a shroud. Her tears had already ruined the expensive makeup the maids had forced onto her face. She looked like a ghost, her small frame dwarfed by the towering arches of the hall. Surrounding her were rows of men in black suits. Robotic, cold, and utterly indifferent to her suffering. To them, she wasn't a bride, she was a new asset being filed away. Then, he walked in. The sight of him made Yn's heart skip a beat in pure terror. Taehyung wasn't wearing a pristine tuxedo. He was wearing a white suit that had been transformed into a gruesome masterpiece of scarlet. Blood was splattered across his chest, smeared on his jaw, and dripping from his knuckles. He looked like he had just walked out of a massacre, yet his expression was as calm as a summer lake. Matthew, standing in the front row, leaned slightly toward Xavier and murmured under his breath. Matthew, did he really come like this to his own wedding? She's already scared of her own shadow, and he shows up looking like a literal horror movie. Is he trying to give her a heart attack before the I-dos? Xavier's eyes cut toward Matthew with such sharp lethality that the younger man nearly tripped. Matthew quickly gulped, staring at his shoes. Matthew, I meant, what a perfect couple. A pure angel with a BL00 dyed devil. Wow. What an ironic, wonderful couple. Truly a match made in, well, somewhere. Taehyung ignored them. His heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoed as he approached the altar. He stopped right beside Yn, the metallic scent of fresh blood clashing violently with the sweet lilies in the hall. The priest, trembling so hard the Bible nearly slipped from his hands, began the ceremony. Taehyung leaned down, his lips ghosting over Yn's ear. Taehyung, it was an important work, little malice. He whispered, his voice like velvet dipped in gravel. Taehyung, I couldn't leave the guests waiting for their final goodbye. Yn let out a broken whimper, her knees nearly buckling. Xavier, do you, Kimtaehyung, agree to take Park Yn as your reluctant wife? In sickness and in health? In rich and richer times? Do you promise to be a faithful captor, for as long as you both shall live? Taehyung, smirk, I do. Xavier, and do you, Park Yn, take Kimtaehyung to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to be cooperative and faithful? To be the best wife you can be? To not slit Commander throat while he sleep? Her throat closed up. She couldn't speak. She just stared at the blood on his cuff. Taehyung leaned in closer, inhaling the scent of her terror with a dark, satisfied hum. Taehyung. Say it, little malice. Or the next person I visit won't be a stranger. He breathed, his voice a low, melodic threat. Why yes. She choked out, the word followed by a fresh sob. Taehyung's smirk was sharp enough to cut. Priest, stammered, now, the groom may kiss the bride. Taehyung didn't look at the priest. He looked at the room full of men. Taehyung, everyone out. In less than 10 seconds, the hall was a tomb. Only the two of them remained under the watchful eyes of the stone saints on the walls. Taehyung took a slow, predatory step toward her. Yn instinctively moved back, but he was faster. For the first time, he didn't use the dupatta. He reached out with his bare, blood-stained hand and clamped it firmly around her waist, pulling her flesh against his chest. The white silk of her dress was instantly ruined, stained with the vivid red of his sins. His other hand rose, his fingers still warm with someone else's lifeblood, caressing her pale cheek. Yn exhaled a shaky, broken breath, her head shaking in a desperate no as she felt his skin against hers. He was finally touching her. The restriction was gone. He was marking her, painting her in his colors. As his grip loosened slightly, she took the chance to scramble away. She turned around to run, to find an exit, but her legs turned to jelly and a piercing, high-pitched scream left her mouth. She froze, her hands flying to her face. Before she could even breathe, Taehyung was behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his blood-soaked suit. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply, his smirk vibrating against her skin. He whispered darkly, his eyes locked on the gate. Taehyung, don't give such a cruel reaction to them, little malice. They are now they are our children. See how patiently they are waiting for your motherly love? Don't be a cruel mother to our children. And don't be a cruel wife to the children's father. Rabbit face to be continued. Rabbit face. Second part will only come if this video gets a good response.